They buried the deed with his mother. And when Roy Harper came back to claim the land, the town said he didn't own a damn thing. Folks whisper behind dusty church pews and lean across feed store counters, saying things like, he's just another drifter with a last name that used to mean something. But the land didn't lie. The scar on the western hill, where his grandfather once split limestone by hand. The apple tree his mother planted the day Roy was born. The gravel road she walked barefoot every Sunday. They were all still there. The sheriff might have the papers now, but Roy had memory, history, roots. That was the thing about legacy. It didn't fade because the county clerk lost a folder. And as Roy stood in the tall grass, staring at the private property, "Do not enter" sign hammered into his family's soil, he whispered to the wind, "Let him try and take it from me." Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and whether justice ever came quietly where you live. The first man who tried to run Roy off the land showed up in a shiny white truck, boots cleaner than his conscience, and a clipboard that smelled like courthouse ink. He called himself Mr. Lanning, property manager for some LLC that had bought up half the county in 6 months. "I'm going to need you to vacate," Lanning said, not even glancing up. Roy didn't answer at first. He just stooped down, picked a stone from the dry soil, and turned it over in his palm, smooth on one side, chipped on the other like the truth. "This here's my land," he said quietly, "and I ain't going nowhere." Lanning laughed, but not with humor. "You people think history gives you ownership. Newsflash, it doesn't." Roy tilted his head. "That deed might have changed hands in your files. But out here, paper don't plant trees or bury loved ones." Lanning's smile twisted. "Then I guess we'll see who the law sides with." The truck pulled away, dust cloud curling like smoke in the hot air. Roy didn't move, didn't blink. He just watched it disappear, like the others who tried to pretend this place wasn't haunted by memory. The next visit wasn't from a man in a suit. It was from a bulldozer. No warning, no knock, just a low rumble of steel teeth and ambition, crawling up the hill like a waking beast. Roy heard it before he saw it, felt it in his chest like thunder under skin. He ran, not away, toward it, toward the machine tearing a line straight through his family's orchard, the place where his mother once hung wind chimes and his father strung lights for Christmas in the lean years. The driver was some kid, maybe 19, wearing headphones and chewing gum like he wasn't trespassing on history. Roy climbed up the treads and pounded on the glass. The boy flinched, pulled the headphones down, and Roy didn't yell. He didn't need to. Turn it off. The engine whined, then fell silent. "I was told this was cleared," the boy stammered, eyeing Roy like a man not used to being looked through. Roy's jaw tightened. "This land don't belong to who told you that." The boy nodded once, then backed the dozer down the hill. No argument. Sometimes Roy thought the land speaks loudest when you stand still. That night, Roy lit a fire in the old stone ring behind the barn, same place his grandfather used to sit with a flask and a story, warning Roy that land wasn't something you inherited. It was something you protected. He didn't drink, not like his granddad did, but he kept the bottle close anyhow. By midnight, headlights approached. 2 trucks this time. Lanning stepped out of one, flanked by a deputy in a uniform Roy didn't recognize. Not Sheriff Malden, but some young buck with shiny boots and an unsure grip on his holster. "You're trespassing on corporate property," the deputy said, reciting it like a script he didn't believe. Roy stood. "Got a badge, but no backbone," he muttered. "Boy, do you even know who owned this valley before your department had a budget?" Lanning interjected, smug as ever. "This isn't about the past. You don't own this anymore." Roy's voice was calm. Funny how men with power forget the law only works when it's honest. The deputy hesitated, then lowered his hand from his belt. "I'll file the report," he said quietly. Lanning's face darkened. Roy watched them leave, then turned back to fire. The land was still quiet, but it was watching. The following morning, Roy walked the boundary lines with a worn leather journal, his mother's. Each page held maps she'd drawn by hand, notes on every tree planted, each fence post sunk, every corner of the property stitched together with care and memory. In the margins, she'd written names. Old Oak split, Bluebird Nest Ridge, Creek Bend Hollow. Places no modern surveyor would find on a GPS. Roy snapped photos of every landmark, cross-referencing them with county plats, deeds, and a grainy photo of his grandfather shaking hands with a state assessor in 1971. He wasn't just fighting sentiment anymore. He was building a case. That evening, he drove into town and sat across from the only lawyer who still used a rotary phone, a woman named Nora Parrish, gray hair pulled tight and eyes sharper than glass. She listened as he laid out every document, every contradiction, every way the land was being swallowed by lies. When he finished, she folded her hands and said, "They think you're just a ghost clinging to dirt. Let's remind them ghosts can testify." Roy smiled for the first time in days. Not because he had hope, but because now, so did the land. Word spread quick in small towns. Not through papers or posts, but through glances, gas pumps, and the long silence after a name is mentioned. By Friday, half the county knew Roy Harper had filed a claim to retitle the land, and the other half knew Lanning had threatened to sue for obstruction. Roy didn't care about gossip. What shook him was a letter nailed to his barn door. "You don't belong here. Leave before it gets worse." No signature, just smeared ink and a muddy boot print. He held in his hand for a long time, staring at the crooked nail it dangled from, wondering what kind of man sends a threat in the night, but forgets the land watches too. That night, Roy walked the fence line with a lantern and a .22 rifle. He wasn't expecting trouble, just wanted the land to know he was awake, alert, and not afraid. When he reached the creek bend, he paused. A single shoe print in the mud. Not old, not his. Roy knelt, brushed the dirt aside, and whispered, "Let the devil come." Just means he's close to being cast out. The storm came 2 nights later. Not rain, but law. 3 sheriff cruisers, no sirens. Just the crunch of tires on gravel, and the flicker of red-blue lights bleeding through Roy's windows. Sheriff Malden had finally shown up, his face drawn tight with something between pity and regret. "I told you to file that claim years ago, Roy," he muttered, stepping out into the wet grass. "They've got paperwork now. Court's ruling says it's not yours." Roy didn't flinch. "Court don't own what it's never seen." Malden sighed, hand resting on his belt. "They'll seize the land by Monday if you stay." Roy stared at him a long time, then turned and pointed toward the northern ridge. "See that field? My mama, and I buried her dog there the day Daddy died. He ran off after the hearse and never came home. You gonna tell me that belongs to them too?" Malden looked away. "Just go, Roy, while you still got your name and bones intact." Roy nodded once. Not agreement, acknowledgement. He closed the door without another word. But later, by the fire, he whispered to Wind, "Let him come Monday. I'll be waiting." Monday arrived like a funeral procession, slow, grim, and full of strangers in polished boots. County officials, a private contractor, 2 armed deputies. They came to evict, to pave, to measure and erase. But they didn't expect a line of trucks parked across the gravel drive, nor the 27 neighbors who stood shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, boots planted. Some Roy hadn't spoken to in years. Others had only nodded at him in passing. But they were here, not for him, for the land. Nora Parrish was there too, holding a thick folder of counterfilings and injunctions, her voice sharp as frost as she told the foreman, "Step 1 foot past that marker and you'll be explaining it to a judge." Lanning's voice cracked as he tried to bark orders, but no one moved. The wind carried the sound of creek water and distant thunder. Roy stepped forward, eyes locked on the same deputy who'd visited that first night. "I told you this land remembers." The man hesitated, then tipped his hat and turned away. One by one, the rest followed, and for the first time in a long while, the valley was quiet, not from fear, but from respect. Lanning didn't show his face again, but his silence was loud. The LLC folded within weeks. Something about mismanaged funds and a clerical mishap in the deed acquisition. Roy never saw the fine print. Didn't care to. Nora said the courts ruled in his favor, retroactively honoring the handwritten surveys and familial claim. It made headlines in 3 counties. But Roy wasn't chasing victory, just peace. Still, when he walked the ridge and saw the rusted sign they once posted, "Do not enter," Lying face down in the mud, he didn't move it. He let it rot, let it be swallowed by the same ground they'd tried to claim. That fall, Roy rebuilt the fence with help from folks who'd stood with him. No words, just hands and hammers and sweat. The orchard bloomed early that year. Apples too red, too sweet, like the land was offering thanks. And one morning, when Roy stood beside the creek and watched the deer drink where the bulldozer had once threatened, he finally let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Not everything broken needs fixing. Some things just need protecting. Winter came soft that year, as if the land was resting after its long defense. Snow gathered on fence posts like a blessing, and Roy spent most mornings with coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the ridge his grandfather once cleared. The farmhouse was still drafty, still worn, but it breathed easy again. Peace doesn't always come with triumph. Sometimes it comes in knowing you stayed, when others said you should run. The locals still talk about it, usually low and reverent, like recalling a storm that missed them by inches. And when new folks drive through and ask about the rusted sign at the edge of Harper Land, someone always smiles and says, "That's not a warning. That's a reminder." Roy never sought praise, but the land did. Every time the wind moved through the trees or the creek whispered against the rocks, it told the same story, of roots deeper than law, of memory carved in stone, of a man who stood when it mattered. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice sounds like silence, ringing through a valley no one could steal.